At the supermarket, my daughter-in-law called me.
Don't come to the family reunion. You're too old.
My son stood right next to it and said nothing. I did not object. I did not explain anything. I just put the eggs back and said, "All right." A week later, while they were having a toast in an elegant restaurant, the door opened, and the woman they were trying to hide was exactly the one who silenced the whole room. The call reached me while I was standing in front of the refrigerator shelf in the Edeka. My hand was already on a cool pack of organic eggs when Sabine's voice suddenly penetrated sharply into my ear. She sounded frighteningly objective, almost like a cool secretary canceling an unimportant appointment. "Helga, please don't come to the family reunion on Sunday," she said without introduction. "You're just way too old for this kind of modern event."
We want it to be a dynamic evening. I held my breath for a moment.
Since the death of my husband 3 years ago, I had opened my big house in Hamburg-Bergedorf for my son Thomas and his wife Sabine. I lived downstairs, she lived upstairs. "Too old?" I repeated quietly, while a stranger pushed his shopping cart impatiently past me. "Yes," she continued. "You often don't understand modern conversations properly anymore. It would be embarrassing for all of us if you get tired so early again. We want to be among ourselves, with people who really fit our lifestyle." Thomas didn't say a single word in the background. I heard only the rhythmic click of a computer keyboard. He was in the room, he heard everything, and he was cowardly silent.
This silence of my son hit me harder than Sabine's open arrogance.
"I understand," I finally said quite calmly.
No trembling in the voice, no tears.
Sabine added, "Thank you for your understanding, Helga. We just don't want it to be uncomfortable for anyone." I hung up and put the eggs back very slowly. I didn't need any more eggs today.
A sudden, ice-cold clarity arose in my chest.
If I was too old for her celebration, then I was also too old to continue to finance her comfortable lifestyle in my house.
I left the supermarket without shopping.
On the way home in the bus, I watched the rain-soaked streets of Hamburg. People always thought that silence was weakness. But at my age, you learn that silence is often just the necessary preparation for a precise action.
At home, I heard her loud laughter upstairs.
They were already planning without me. I sat down at my secretary and took out my gray notebook. There were numbers in it, which from today took on a new meaning. In the evening, we sat in the kitchen as usual. It was my kitchen with the massive oak furniture that my husband and I had proudly bought 30 years ago. Sabine was constantly typing on her mobile phone, while Thomas was listlessly poking around in his salad. Neither of the two mentioned the phone call at the supermarket. It was as if I had already become an invisible ghost in my own four walls. The food tastes a bit furt today, unfortunately. Mom suddenly noticed Thomas without looking at me. Sabine immediately nodded in agreement. Maybe the sense of taste just leaves Helga in old age. "We should take over the cooking completely from next week. Then you have much less stress." It sounded like an offer, but in truth it was a dictation. They wanted full control of the common room. "That's an excellent idea," I replied peacefully. I took a sip of water. "Then I will also do my shopping separately from Monday. It makes no sense that I pay for things that I supposedly no longer taste." Sabine paused. That was absolutely not part of their plan. My monthly contribution to the budget money was considerable. "Well, we rather thought that we would keep your card and do the errands," she started. I interrupted her with a gentle smile. "No, Sabine, if I'm too old for social conversations, I'm also too old for the responsibility of keeping supplies for 3 people. We will separate this from now on." Thomas looked at me briefly irritated, but seemed more annoyed than worried. He relied on me to give in the end, but he forgot that I was the one who had kept this house debt-free. After dinner, I went to my room and turned the key. A sound that you couldn't hear above, but that sounded like a starting signal to me. I took out my old schedule. The meeting was in 6 days. They thought I was sitting lonely in my armchair. They had no idea that I had already made the first arrangements to officially end my status as an invisible woman. Everything was ready.
The morning started early.
I usually prepared breakfast while Sabine was getting ready. However, today my door remained closed. I heard how they were frantically running around upstairs, how the coffee machine was waiting for water in vain. I sat calmly in my armchair and read the newspaper. At 10 o'clock, when they were both out of the house, I started my work. It was not revenge, it was a factual inventory. Legally, I owned the entire house. Thomas and Sabine occupied the upper floor rent-free on the condition that they took care of the garden and the heavy purchases. They had neglected both. Instead, they used my ground floor as a storage room for their packages and sports equipment. I went into the common hallway. There was the expensive e-bike of Thomas, which blocked the way to the basement. I pushed it out into the shed with force and locked it massively. I got the second key for emergencies back from the key box unnoticed. I exchanged it for a worthless key. Then I called my friend Gerda. She was 72, fun-loving, and owned a well-groomed classic car. Ger, I said firmly.
Do you remember the Bellums? The exclusive address on the Ulster?
Of course, she answered in surprise. Please reserve us a table for Sunday evening, the best table in the house, and put on your elegant dress. Whip at the other end. I thought your family was celebrating Thomas's promotion there. That's exactly what they do, I replied coolly, and I decided that I'm not too old for this evening. Just too old to sit at your table. When I hung up, I felt lighter. I went to the kitchen and made myself a strong coffee.
Just for me alone.
The empty water tank of the community machine was just as dry as it was. If they wanted modernity, they had to learn to operate their devices themselves. I would no longer be the silent servant in the background from today on. I was the owner, and today I started to reclaim the space that had been mine for years. I felt alive like I haven't felt in a long time. When Thomas came home in the evening, he found me in the garden. I cut the rose bushes, a job he should have done 2 weeks ago. Mother, why is the shed locked? I didn't get to my bike this morning, he shouted irritably over the fence. He was sweaty and his tie was hanging askew. Oh, I thought you had misplaced your key, I said calmly, without looking up. I changed the lock. The insurance company insisted on it because there is so much expensive equipment in it that does not belong to me. And where is my new key? He demanded. I only have 2 copies at the moment, one for me and one for an emergency at Girder. You can ask me politely every time you need the bike. Thomas stared at me, stunned. At that moment, Sabine came to it.
What's going on here, Helger?
I can't find my designer shoes in the hallway. I slowly straightened up and wiped the earth off my gloves. They were in the way, Sabine. I packed them in a cardboard box and put them at the top of your stairs. I want the ground floor to remain absolutely free from private items that do not belong to me from now on. My age has recently made me a little more order-loving.
Sabine narrowed her eyes.
Are you playing the offended liver sausage now because of Sunday dinner? This is really childish, quite the contrary, I answered firmly. I completely accept your decision. You want to be among you, and I want to have my personal space for myself from now on. That's just consistent, isn't it? The two spent the rest of the evening in a loud whisper on the upper floor. I heard the distinct clatter of furniture. Most likely, they were now trying to squeeze all their belongings into their own place. I was sitting downstairs in the silence of my living room, looking at the invitation card to the Bellumus, a place of etiquette. I already knew exactly what I was going to wear on Sunday. It would be a blue dream made of silk, a dress for a woman who knows what she wants. On Wednesday morning, I went to the bank. It was a gray day in Hamburg, but my mood was determined. So far, I had kept a joint account with Thomas, from which all fixed costs for the house and the groceries went. My husband had wanted it that way to make it easier for Thomas to get started. But this start has been going on for 3 years now, while his salary has been steadily increasing. I was sitting across from a young bank consultant. I want to dissolve the joint account, I explained matter-of-factly, and switch all standing orders for electricity, water, and internet to my private account, but only for my percentage share. The man looked at me confused. How do you mean that? The house has technically separate meters for both floors. I would like Thomas's share to be debited directly from his salary account from next month. Here are all the necessary data. It was legally my right as the sole owner. When I left the bank, I felt a strange enough booking.
When I got home, I put a little note on the fridge.
Dear Thomas, since I am officially too old for the joint organization according to Sabine, I have consequently also separated our accounts. Please set up your own contracts for the upper floor by Friday. As Sabine was writing the note in the afternoon, I heard a suppressed scream from above. A little later, she stormed angrily into my living room. You can't possibly be serious about that, Helga. We have big expenses this month because of the event at the Bellamza. This is unfortunate, I said, while calmly solving a crossword puzzle. But since I'm not taking part in this event, I don't see why I should continue to cross-finance your private luxury costs.
You wanted independence.
Here she is. Thomas held Sabine by the arm. He looked worried for the first time. He slowly realized that the old woman held the entire financial foundation. Without this foundation, your house of cards of status symbols would soon collapse into itself. The course was now irrevocably set. I smiled silently into myself and solved the next word. Independence with 11 letters fit perfectly. Friday and Saturday passed in an eerily peaceful tension. Thomas and Sabine largely ignored me, but were remarkably quiet. I saw through the window how packages with expensive clothes for Sunday were delivered. Sabine wanted to shine. She wanted to mime the perfect wife of the aspiring head of the department. I spent Saturday afternoon at the hairdresser, not at my usual store, but in a state-of-the-art salon in the city center. Get me ready for a big gig, I told the stylist. 2 hours later, I barely recognized myself in the shop window. My gray hair was perfectly in shape, my makeup was discreet, and my posture was much more upright.
The night before the big day, Thomas knocked timidly on my door. Mother, have you seen my silver cufflinks?
The one from father. I looked at him calmly. He looked tired. They're in the safe, Thomas, and since I'm too old to remember complicated things, I've locked the combination away for safety's sake.
I don't want anything to be lost.
He stared at me, stunned. Are you going to punish me now?
No, Thomas.
I'm just protecting my memories. You said I wouldn't understand your world anymore. Maybe I understand the true value of these buttons better than you. He went back upstairs without a word.
I put my own dress ready.
It was a deep blue silk dress that I hadn't worn for years. It smelled of lavender and of a time when I was still treated with respect. Sabine thought she had sorted me out like an unusable piece of furniture, but she had forgotten that real antiques gain in hardness with each passing year, while modern Sparnplatten furniture falls apart on the first move. Tomorrow she would see how stable a real antique can be. Gerda would pick me up on time at p.m. The feast at the Bellams should begin at noon. I planned to appear exactly at 19 o'clock, when everyone was already sitting in their seats and the eyes were fixed on me. I was ready for the big stage. Tomorrow, Hamburg would be amazed. The Bellams. When Gera's old-timer drove up, the wagon master opened the door for us.
I slowly got out of the back straight.
Gera looking fantastic in her red ensemble.
Are you ready? She whispered to me.
I'm more than ready, I answered without hesitation. We entered the restaurant. The smell of truffles and expensive perfume was in the air. The hostess led us to our table. I had made sure that he was exactly in the center of the big hall. Just 2 meters away, Thomas's family was sitting with his most important colleagues. As we passed by her table, the cheerful clink of glasses fell silent. Sabine, who was just laughing with a glass of champagne, froze. Thomas dropped his fork in fright. I stopped for a moment, bowed my head elegantly, and smiled at Sabine.
Good evening, everyone.
You have chosen a really beautiful arrangement here. Very modern, exactly as promised. I gave Thomas a cool look and calmly walked on. We sat down. I could literally feel her shock as a cold shiver in my back. Thomas, isn't that your mother over there? I heard the sonorous voice of his boss, Mr. Meyer. She looks absolutely stunning. Why isn't she sitting here with us?
Thomas stammered something incomprehensible from separate plans. Sabine was now deep red.
Her facade of cool arrogance got deep cracks. They had told everyone I was too sick or too tired. Now I was sitting here more vital and elegant than she herself, and I was sure to order the wine list.
The game of truth had just begun.
The first viewers already began to ask very unpleasant questions. Mr. Meyer was now watching Thomas with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Sabine tried desperately to steer the conversation to her new projects, but no one was really listening to her anymore. The presence of the Bay, outcast mother at the neighbor's table, was the only thing that really interested people at that moment. I raised my glass and cheered Gerda on. It was a wonderful wine. During the first course, I watched the events at the neighbors from the corners of my eyes. Sabine tried desperately to attract attention again, but the topic was now Helga. Mr. Mir looked over to us again and again. He seemed to feel that something was wrong here. "Helga, they're boiling over there with rage," Gur whispered. "Let her cook," I replied loudly enough.
"You're missing the salt in the soup tonight."
After a while, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. He got up stiffly and came over to our table. He looked small next to the designer chairs. "Mother, what is this staging for?" "This is embarrassing," he hissed softly. "Embarrassing?" I asked loudly enough for everyone. "I'm just enjoying an evening with a friend. You told me I was too old for your modern meeting. I just wanted to spare you the embarrassment, having a confused old woman at your table. I'm not bothering anyone here, am I?" Mr. Mir, who had followed Thomas, put a hand on his shoulder. His gaze was icy.
"Thomas, please leave your mother in peace."
"Mrs. Lehman, I didn't know that you were such a connoisseur of gastronomy. Come over to us later for a glass of champagne." "This is very friendly, Mr. Mir," I answered charmingly. "But I really don't want to burden the modern round over there. We seniors prefer to stay among ourselves today, just like my daughter-in-law recommended it to me." The devastating look that Mr. Meyer gave to Thomas and then to the stunned Sabine was worth more than any apology. In the Hamburg business world, a lack of respect for the family was a sign of an unreliable character. Thomas's promotion suddenly felt very unstable. He returned to his place with his head down. The laughter at her table had finally died down. Sabine stared at her plate in silence. They had tried to cowardly erase me from their world, but I had put myself right in the center with all my might. They wanted a show. I gave them a lesson. The evening was still young, and my appetite was excellent. The return journey to Bergedorf was in solemn silence. Gerda sat me down and squeezed my hand.
"You were great, Helga."
When I opened the front door, I heard Thomas's car rolling into the driveway only a little later. I went straight to the kitchen, turned on the light, and made myself a cup of tea. I waited. They literally stormed into the house. Sabine was beside herself with anger. "You ruined everything," Mr. Mir hardly looked at me anymore.
"He now considers us inhumans."
"Isn't that really you?" I asked with an ice cold.
I put my cup down slowly.
"You lied to me, excluded me from my own social life, and treated me here like an annoying burden that is only tolerated as long as the money is flowing." "It was just a dinner," Thomas cried desperately. "No, it was the symbol of your disrespect," I replied firmly.
I got up slowly.
"And since we are talking about modernity right now, here are the new lease agreements. Since you are now independent and successful, you will pay a standard rent, including all additional costs, to me from next month. In addition, I have decided that the ground floor will remain closed for you from now on. There is no more pass-through zone for people I am embarrassed by." Thomas looked like I had punched him in the face.
"Rent in your own house."
That's exactly what I emphasized. If I'm too old to be part of this family, then I'm also too old to play your free hostel. You have 1 week to sign these contracts or to look for your own apartment. After all, you are young and do not need an old ballast. Sabine wanted to say something poisonous, but she didn't have the words. Without my free house, they simply could not afford their luxury. I walked past them to the stairs. "Good night. Oh, and Thomas, your father's cufflinks are still in the safe. You have to earn the shine through character." At that moment, I finally felt like the mistress in my own kingdom again. 3 days later, I was sitting on my sunny terrace in the morning. The air was fresh, and the birds were singing in the trees of my garden. The sun was shining warmly on the roses, which I now cared for again with devotion. On the table was the signed lease. Thomas had put it on the dresser in the hallway without a word last night. I knew that he now had to look for a part-time job to cover the new fixed costs. Sabine had become remarkably quiet in the last few days. She greeted me now every time with an almost anxious politeness. They had learned that my borders were made of the most solid concrete. I hadn't kicked them out of the house, but I had held up the mirror of reality to them. The balance of power was now clearly defined. I was no longer the weak mother who could be fed on the phone, but the woman who owned the roof over their heads. Sometimes I heard them arguing upstairs. It was about money, and how they could reconcile Mr. Meir again. But it didn't interest me anymore.
I had found my own freedom again.
I was already planning my next trip with Gare. Not a senior citizen trip on the bus, but a tour through the wineries of southern Germany. Last night, Thomas had asked me carefully if I wanted to have a barbecue with them on Sunday. Maybe I had answered without obligation. I have to see if I have time first. I've been in great demand lately. It was a little lie, but it felt good. I was certainly not too old for this world. I had just finally gotten old enough to never let myself be belittled again.
When I drank my tea, I felt a deep satisfaction.
True revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes in life it is quite enough to hold the key to your own resources firmly in your hand and just say no at the right moment. I looked up briefly to the windows on the first floor. They knew perfectly well now. The old woman is no longer sleeping. She watches and she decides about her own future. Everything had now found its place.